Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk with James Sinclair. He is the Chief Executive and co-founder of Enterprise Alumni. This is a really interesting concept. They are the market leader in alumni and retiree engagement within organizations. And so he's going to talk a little bit about his software and how it works. But basically what they do is they capitalize on the networks of the previous employees, the people that have retired or moved on, and it's just really, really powerful. So I'm excited to have him here today, and he's creating transformation in this space. And so looking forward to learning from him. So James, welcome. We're excited that you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole.
It's a pleasure. And thank you to Alex Brady, who is the host of it's called the Positive Leadership Movement podcast. And she's all about happiness at work. And she recommended that James and I connect. And so thank you, Alex, for the connection. I love it when people introduce me because, we would never be, maybe through LinkedIn, we get lucky and, out of the thousands of people that follow you and myself, that we might've gotten lucky connected. But when somebody says, hey, you two need to meet, then I listen and I pay attention to that. And it always works out. So yeah, I love that.
Kudos to Alex on that. And I think the recognition of the power of referral, the power of network. And what was funny is I was already following you and your podcast. I went to go connect with you on LinkedIn and was like, oh, one sec. And I put those things together and it made me smile even more. So it was a fan before I was a guest.
Oh, see, now you got extra brownie points with me. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. It's like, wow, somebody's actually following. It's awesome.
It's lovely. It's amazing. And I love the content you produce. And I love the fact that I was already following you before we met.
That's awesome. Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate it. You know what? We also appreciate for those of you that are listening. That's a kudos to you is thank you for listening and thank you for supporting this podcast because you're the reason why we do this podcast. And so thank you, James, for that. And thank you all for listening and tuning in today. So let's have some fun. I know, James, we had a conversation beforehand and we were laughing and so forth. And I thought, man, we should just be recording right now. It was so much fun. So I know we're going to have some fun here today. But in terms of this topic, let's start here with the Enterprise Alumni in this brilliant concept that you came up with. How did you come up with it in the first place?
Yeah, I would like to tell you that, a flash of light, a unicorn jumped out and I was like, this is my calling. I think, but alas, that is not the story. I'm sorry. I think it was more, I've always been in rapid innovation, always looking for white space. I was focused on large enterprises, realizing the power of agility in the cloud. What you've seen in the past kind of almost decade is anything is possible. If you can dream it, someone can build it and fast, and you can prototype and you can iterate. And I was introduced to the HR line of business and kind of human resources technology, and I was unbelievably underwhelmed. They were talking about concepts that sales teams had been doing for a decade. I remember going to a conference and the big topic was, an AI chatbot to help employees. And I couldn't work out why we should be. Are we excited or are we I'm not quite sure I understand why we're excited about this because every website on earth has had one for B2C. And so I was in the HR line of business, working with some customers, and this topic came up from one of the customers we were talking about. And I was like, huh. And as you started looking and you started realizing, you suddenly saw this enormous white space. And as we thought about kind of the future of work and where it's going and reskilling and speed of hire and all of the buzzwords around kind of recruiting the right person, surely if you kept in touch with your former employees, it would give you access to a pre-qualified, pre-vetted talent pool. Surely that was good for the bottom line. And so it started on that premise. And we, that was about 3.5 years ago. And we've been kind of on this journey ever since. And kudos to the customers that have helped us build this product and articulate our journey and understand kind of the gap we're filling. Because I think when we started, we saw a space, we kind of understood what that space was. We saw enough space to invest, but couldn't quite see, all the way. And so our customers through these years have been the ones that really helped us understand what it is we do, how we serve them, how we deliver, and how to articulate the message as well.
Well, and I think the market really confirmed the value of your idea, because when I look at your website and I see some of the companies that you're talking about, our customers, these are some big name companies. And in 3.5 years, it probably has felt like for you an eternity and yet a split second at the same time. But really 3.5 years to be able to get these clients on board, bought into a new idea,
Mhm.
is pretty amazing when you think about it. I mean, Google and like there's a whole list of them there. And so obviously this was an idea whose time has come, if you will. And to your point, you mentioned about sales, we focus on how can we serve the customer. We focus on how can we find more customers? How can
Right.
we, attract more customers? And there's a lot of investment into that space and very little investment into the space of HR in terms
Yeah.
of innovation and so forth. So, talking about this idea of speed of innovation in HR, you're leading that. So, what are some of the things that you recommend organizations do to start adopting this concept of supporting their alumni, the boomerang employee? What does that even mean? Kind of
Yeah.
unpack this a little bit further for us.
So I think to kind of start that conversation at the top, my belief is HR teams should have their own engineering squad, an amazing designer, an amazing engineer, an amazing prototyper, so that when they dream, they can actually see it play out. I think that's the future of kind of innovation in the large enterprise, is recognizing, that you can go from idea to product very, very quickly. And I think that plays into our product as well, our customer roadmap and hearing their feedback. And when we love an idea and get excited and passionate about it, it amazes me and thrills me and our customers when 60 days later, it arrives. And the customer was like, 1 second, that was my idea, and we give them the credit for it, but they're not so amazed about what it came out. It was the speed. We heard you, we listened, we iterated, you were part of that. And I think when we think about the business we're in, you are in a market, if we take where we are right now with COVID, with all the layoffs and all of these things happen, the reality is people are leaving, voluntary or not, jobs sooner. No one's staying for life. There's no such thing as, going to work, at GE for 45 years. That's not happening anymore. So we know that tenure is going down. And so we know companies spend an enormous amount of money kind of finding the right candidate, recruiting them, bringing them in, training them, all of that stuff. And then when they walk out the door, like at best, an edible arrangements, and there's no other asset. And I hate to call people an asset, but you have to in this context. There's no other asset you invest so heavily in that you would let just fall off the balance sheet. And so from just a financial perspective, after investing this amount with you, it makes sense to maintain a relationship. But second, it goes back to that thing, which is that when you bring someone back, they're a good fit. Because you know everything about them, the cobwebs and all, both ways. They also know the cobwebs of the company. You know that they're going to be quick because they know where to park. They know how to do the bits. They know elevator 7 is slow. They're going to be quicker to speak in a meeting because they have confidence and they know some of those people. So everything is just accelerated. I heard an amazing stat this morning that basically said 50% of executive recruits, very senior recruits, end up being bad. And surely bringing back someone who knows your company, has worked, perhaps wasn't that executive level yet, would mitigate that risk somewhat. So that's what we're in. We're in the concept of saying, let's just have a relationship. Who knows where it leads? And my final point on that is a quote that I often attribute possibly to the wrong person, the CHRO of Starbucks, who said that when every employee leaves, they are promoted to customer. And therefore, every touch point we have to have with them has to be how we would treat a customer at every single touch point. And anything less than that, we do not deserve their business. And that was a little bit of like of course, but still for someone to state that, to recognize that, and to be on a mission to execute that is a really great reflection of the new HR leadership of people first.
Well, that is a transformational thought because it's not occurring right now.
Right.
And usually when somebody leaves a company, unless they had a really good relationship and they knew they're like, okay, so they're retiring or whatever, there's a certain scenario that makes sense, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, so we understand you're moving or whatever, then maybe it's a positive
Mhm.
interaction and send off. But a lot of times it's not. It's like, you're
Treason.
leaving us? Treason, exactly. It's like, what? You're leaving us? We're so awesome. It's kind of
Right.
like a relationship. It's like, you're breaking up with me and you want to be friends. I don't want to be friends with you, and we take that into the workplace and we miss out on this
Yeah.
opportunity, like you said. And that really stuck with me when you said that. Even previously when we were talking about this idea of them being customers, treating them as
Right.
soon as they leave, they become customers. How would you treat them if you saw them as customers and or potential customers? Completely different.
Complete. I mean, the whole cycle, you go into a car dealership, you have all these conversations, you do this research, you decide not right now, and you walk out. The guy, or the gal in the car dealership is going to just snub you and turn around? No, he or she knows that there's an opportunity. So you can literally place all of this back into a sales conversation. And because that's what this is. And I think people forget that when you go to your next job, the first question is going to be, hey, where were you last? And you're either going to be like, I was here and, oh, I escaped. Or it's going to be, oh, I was here. It's amazing. I think we should grab some people from here. We might be able to work with them. And I think you nailed it, that when you leave a company, and I'm not talking about Margarita Fridays at TGI Fridays with your friends when you leave. What I'm talking about is the organizational relationship with you. And I think there's a misunderstanding of loyalty. Employment of someone is a privilege, not a right. And I think companies are starting to realize that it is a privilege for me to employ you, and I need to work every day to retain that privilege. And when you leave, I think the second thing that you're starting to see change is take credit. That person is leaving and going to a better job because of the skills, the learning, the work that they accomplished in your organization. It should be a tremendous moment. One second, we're so good as an organization. Our competitor, our customer, our X is poaching from us, and recognize, like, that should be the mindset. And I think you're starting to see companies wake out. Again, it's going to be the innovative leaders, the ones willing to put their neck out, because change requires risk, and risk requires sticking your neck out. And there's a lot of reasons why HR hasn't driven forward, because the risk conversation around HR, whatever one wants to call it, is very different around sales. And sales, let's try it, let's go, let's see what happens. In HR, it's 1 second, we're talking about people, we're talking about compliance, regulation, and all those things. So I understand the lack of perhaps agility, but we are seeing a wave of change, across the board. And I tend to agree with all of it. I think it really is a privilege to employ someone, and an employer should be spending every day thinking how they can retain that privilege.
It's trust. It's trust. They're
Mm-hmm.
trusting you with their potential livelihood. They're trusting you that you're going to do what you say, that you're going to have a great experience. They're going to be spending the better part of their waking hours there with you, giving them, all that you have. So absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting you talk about HR and even just the term HR, human resource, and the way that we see people as assets, as numbers, as,
Right.
a line on a balance sheet, and how do we cut it? And because it's, and it's just all of that gets to change going forward. And that's the competitive advantage you mentioned about companies that are willing to do that. That's their competitive advantage. When I looked at that list of all your customers, those are leading edge companies. And
Yeah.
so there's no mistake in that, right? They are willing to do this. So let's talk about the way that you set that up. So one of the things I remember you were talking to me about was in the interview process, and even while they're working for you, rather than waiting until they're dissatisfied or a little restless, and then they give you the note, or even, they actually give you the notice and say, I'm leaving.
Right.
And you're like, well, wait a second. What did you need? What did you want? Didn't
Right.
you have an opportunity to talk about that on your performance review last year? You could have told us then,
Right.
like,
Right.
they say, like, well, we were blindsided. We weren't expecting that. But because they didn't set it up front, and you talk about how to set that up.
Yeah. So I read a book, I wish I could give the appropriate credit, that talked about the concept of understand where your employees you're hiring need to get to or want to get to. You have to understand those parameters. And so what we started doing here openly is when we're interviewing you on the final stages, I asked the question, hey, when you leave me in 3 years, where do you think you're going to work and what job title? And number one is often people are a little bit taken aback because most people don't have the chance to think about career planning because it's just it just happens. And people often don't take a minute to take stock of their life, where they are, where they're going, how they're going to get to those goals, whether those goals are financial, life, family, whatever those might be. But I want people to be thinking about those goals. I want people to be mapping out their career. I'm not saying it has to be correct. I'm just saying, okay, so you're coming in here as an engineer. Do you believe your next role, you might have some headcount and you're going to move into management? Do you believe you might go into product or something else? But you learn so much when you understand that. And when you break that kind of weird awkwardness of talking about money and employment and where you want to be, the minute that's broken, you can have the most amazing conversations and you learn about people. And so now I know I've got 3 years to make sure that she is equipped to be a great manager of people. And in 3 years, I might not have the role. I might not have the headcount to be able to give it to her. But when she walks out, I know she's walking in to the role that she wants and she's going to crush it. And I know I can say I was a part of that. I know that I will have an ally for life. And I know that we have done right by her. And it doesn't mean we're perfect. It doesn't mean we're amazing. It doesn't mean our touch points are fantastic. There are so many ways that we struggle as an organization to make sure people are doing okay. There's only so many ways you can ask, how are you doing, if that makes sense. But those things where people understand that I'm truly and deeply vested in their continuous education, their continuous learning. And it just means there's no awkward conversation. And I'll never be surprised. No one is ever going to walk into me and be like, surprise, 5 days notice. Never going to happen, because I'll be their first supporter. I remember we hired sorry to shoot off this way. We hired an amazing junior engineer. She walked in, junior engineer. She started 2 weeks in. We realized she had undersold herself in totality. And I was fuming. I was fuming because she had a recruiter, which means the recruiter also undersold her. We were paying her what we shouldn't be, too low. So I remember pulling her into a meeting and she would tell you that I got annoyed at her. And I got annoyed at her for underselling herself. I got annoyed at her for not, and to be frank and to be fair, she is competing in a very male dominated market. She wants to make sure she got the job. She had a lot of reasons why she perhaps came in lower. She also talked about the fact that, if she does something wrong, she's going to be judged heavier than perhaps a male counterpart, and so she'd rather undersell and over deliver. And I said, that's true. And that's amazing. That's good. But you're amazing. And you're not being paid market. So of course we did the adjustments, the salary and all of that. But more importantly, I told her that I expect to be part of every negotiation with her for the rest of her life. I said, when you leave here and you're negotiating, if you don't pull me in, and she'll tell you I was much more aggressive with her because I was annoyed. I was annoyed at the recruiter. I was annoyed at everyone in the process because of how we did or how employment generally works. And I didn't mean to go kind of down that rabbit hole, but that's what we're trying to achieve as a company, which is therefore what we're trying to achieve with our software of taking care of your people, being of service, being of value. You can't have software that's being of service, be of value, and then be an awful employer. It doesn't work. It doesn't translate. Eventually, the resume face falls off and honesty comes out. And so, yeah, I think that was the end of my thought process. Sorry, I fluttered.
No, that was perfect actually, because you brought up a point that without calling it that, mentorship is something that you offered her, and you automatically jumped in and said, hey, wait a second. Now some bosses wouldn't do that. They'd be like, well, too bad. Right. But then of course the problem is that when she realizes that she's actually capable of more, or she gets bored or restless or whatever, she's going to look, and she's not going to come back to you and tell you, hey, what's my next opportunity here? Because if not, I'm going to look elsewhere. She's just going to leave. And
Agreed.
so, and she's not going to have some, a lot of good things to say, or she might be like, oh yeah, it was fine there, but I felt like I was underperforming, or I was undervalued there, and so forth. How many times have we heard people say, I feel undervalued? And is partly because organizations are undervaluing their people. The other side of that is that I'm a big believer in helping people to play to their strengths, is that they're not making the effort to help people to bring their strengths out either.
Right.
And so it does go both ways. But with that idea of mentorship, what if we looked at organizations as opportunities to mentor and to build people up? Like for me, that's what I'm passionate about. It's like, look, it's everything.
Everything.
It's everything. And so it is a ongoing relationship. Like you said, you're going to bring me into every negotiation you do. I'll make sure, you're taken care of, kind of thing, and that is so cool. So thank you for sharing that.
I think you're right about mentorship. I also think you're right about organizations. I mean, I have often been very angry that companies teach hard skills. They don't tell you in your first job, take $10 and put it in a 401k. Take $10, put it in a saving, take $10, put it in a sock. I don't care where it is, just take $10, because, if I had done that my entire life, even if I just compounded and gone, pro rata based on my salary increase, I would have more money in the bank. I would have better cash management. So what is it? Did I have an extra $10 in my first job? I did. Yeah. I mean, I was on the, obviously wasn't crushing it and obviously eating ramen noodles like the rest of us, but I had $10. And, but the trouble is I didn't, putting $10 into saving means nothing. You look at it 6 weeks later, 6 months later, whatever it is, and you got $60 and you're like, well, that's a waste of time, because you don't think about that long-termist view. And that's the exact same conversation with this engineer. Yes, I could have got away with saving X $1,000, paying less, but actually the output, the productivity, the passion, I cannot tell you the number of times that she has stood up and said, oh, I got you. And that's what mentorship is. Mentorship isn't me to her. Loyalty isn't her to me. It's me to her. I have to be loyal to her. She doesn't owe me anything. And I think there's that misunderstanding. And, I don't mean to preach about it, but I really believe that's a fundamental misunderstanding. Teach people how to succeed in life, then teach them the skills above it. And mentorship comes in many ways. It comes in me being angry to that employee that she undersold herself. And I'm okay that I got angry. I'm okay. That was my reaction. It wasn't a negative angry. It was an angry for her, and it was an angry for me. And we need to make it right. And I never wanted that to happen again. And she should have the confidence, and she deserves it, because she's phenomenal. And I keep on going back to that anger, and I know it might be the wrong word, but I want more people to get angry about that. I want more people to have that and be like, I can fix this. And I don't mean fix her. I mean, fix this, a very specific situation for which she will never do that ever again, or have that ever again, period.
Absolutely. And what I heard was advocacy. You were advocating for her rather than anger. It was like, hey, you're worth more. And I don't think anybody would get angry with that. It's like, no, actually, I think you're worth more. We really want to pay you more. So I don't see anybody going, no, don't do that. So yeah, so good. Now, when you talk about your platform, let's just give people a little bit more of a sense of what does it actually do for companies? How does it facilitate this occurring?
So you leave an organization, you're walking out the door, BlackBerry in the trash, Lenovo laptop in the other trash can. The company cannot say to you, hey, do you want to join our talent community and come back? Well, you've made that specifically clear via the revolving door that you're walking out of. What they can say is, let's maintain a relationship. Who knows what tomorrow holds? And so the alumni platform is just that. It is, you can't start with, hey, you want to buy something from us? Hey, you want to come back here? Hey, you want to refer someone? It starts with, actually, how might we serve you? How might we help you? And so our platform is very driven to focusing on the end user. How can we help the alumni? Learning, volunteering, mentoring, all of those things, jobs, side jobs, all the things that we think different people need. So we have a very contextual platform. What we mean by that is an intern would love a side gig, would love a discount in the marketplace, would love a mentor. A senior person would love to be an advisor at a startup, would love to be on our speakers bureau. So it's really important to understand you cannot classify everyone in the same bucket. You have to recognize different people have different needs at different points. And that's what our platform focuses on. And if we focus on delivering value to the end user, and we deliver on giving them a great experience, when the company needs them, when you're going to call on that army, they'll be ready. Whether you're going to call on them to recruit them, to refer someone, to amplify a job post. Yeah, I've got a great example around kind of what it means to have empathy, what it means to understand someone being promoted from employee to customer. And the example is Chili's and Maggiano's Little Italy and those restaurants, kind of America's first job. And what they talk about in the talent team is the kind of vicious cycle, the number of people who start there, they do something, they go out drinking Friday night, Saturday, they forget to wake up and they miss their shift. And so they do what many first-time employees do, which is they stick their head in the sand and pretend that employer, that company, that building just doesn't exist and pray they never cross paths with again. But what this company, Brinker, was saying was, we can't do that, because the next week, that kid's aunt is going to be like, hey, let's celebrate my birthday at Chili's. And that kid's going to be like, yeah, we can't go there. And so I lose one customer because that customer overslept. So I lose one employee because that employee did wrong by us. They did wrong. I didn't do anything. And I'm going to lose another 40 customers. So we have to teach people what it means to pick up the phone and say, I made a mistake, huge error. How can I make this right? So part of the training of Brinker is making sure that when you do screw up as an individual, you don't do, I've done it, stick my head in the sand and hope it goes away. And, you learn over time that's not a strategy that's sustainable. But I think it's a great example of learning a soft skill that will be with these people for life, how to handle conflict, awkwardness, failure. And it starts with someone teaching you, whether it's a mentor, a company, or a thing. And I think people forget about that.
Absolutely. I think that's why we tend to loop and history repeats itself, is because we're not actually extracting all the learning from the experience and passing it on to the next generation. So the next generation has to go through a similar but different experience until they get to the point where they figure it out by 30, 40, 50 years old, when we could be accelerating, to coming back to innovation, we could be accelerating this process if we would just be like, hey, okay, so the 25-year-old or maybe the 20-year-old knows everything. And then by the time they get to 25, they realize they don't. And so there might be a little gap in there where they won't listen to you. But if they're working for you and you create a safe environment, a healthy environment for them to learn, knowing that you are supporting them, knowing that you have their back, that your intention is not to correct them, but your intention is to build them up so that they'll be ready for that next job, then they're going to be far more open to listening and getting that feedback. So yeah, really, really good.
Everyone knows their first jobs. Everyone knows the managers they started. I think you're so right. And I think when we think about, for us, this concept of post-employment, managing or engaging with former employees, we know it makes sense. We know it does. I mean, the data is just overwhelming that, even if you think about kind of adapting to change, companies that can hire quicker will obviously be able to adapt to change quicker. So if we can hire quicker, there's exponential value there. And if you have this pool of people that we know, and we're not going to have to go through this dance, then obviously there is a value proposition here. But, I think it's really important, when you ask me kind of where does it start? It starts with delivering value to the end user, to the alumni, to the former employee, and being of service to them. And it's a hard concept to be of service. It doesn't always work. It takes investment of time, and many people in their jobs don't get the option of time. So they can't invest time because they're going to be out of this job in 2 years. Why would I invest in a multi-year relationship when I'm expecting to be promoted or go to a new company within 18 months? So that's why it has to be a leadership conversation. Not because you need executive support or you need money. It's you need someone who has the long-term vision and says, you know what, we're going to do this. We know it's not going to pay dividends on Tuesday. That's okay. But that's why it has to be leadership. And that's why, it has to start from the top.
So how do you implement this type of, and it's a cultural shift. How do you implement this into an organization that, let's say up until this point, hasn't operated that way?
We speak to a lot of customers. So, 2020 was an incredibly, amazingly awful year for us. What we mean by that is we had a huge wave of new customers, not by their choice. they had huge layoffs and they needed to maintain, so for us, it was a very delicate balancing act, because you want to celebrate the wins, but the win is for all the wrong reasons. And so, it's a difficult but interesting position to be in. But for many of those companies, this triggered that transformation. When they saw their people, when they saw their alumni rally around and come to help and come to be part of it and come to be part of the rebuild, they've got to have that click moment. There is no data, there is no PowerPoint, there is no Excel spreadsheet in the world that can make someone have a click moment and says, oh, take care of people. They just got to work it out for themselves. And so we do see a lot of companies coming to us saying, look, we know we have huge room for improvement. We want to start somewhere. And we love that. Amazing, start somewhere. Let's just take care of people. So when they leave, they get a lovely welcome email. Good luck with your new job. We have one customer that they implemented a function that 2 weeks into your new job, they can send you like a box of cookies. Good luck in your new role. We're wishing you every success. Your team misses you. And I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, we do miss her. So shouldn't we tell her that? And again, I was like, oh, where was that employer when I was going through my career? Like, can you imagine getting a box of cookies from your old company and your old boss specifically? Like, love for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? Done.
Totally. Permanent impression.
Done. Over.
Yeah.
That story I will tell literally for the rest of my life. That story, her telling the story had such an impression on me that I will tell it for the rest of my life. Then you have another customer in the airline business that, had to furlough and lay off thousands of people. And he started holding a monthly kind of Zoom conference with all the people that he'd laid off. And he said he did it for two reasons. Number one, because everyone believes that he knows more than they know. Like, because he's the CEO, he has more access to information. He sits on the councils and all of that. And the second, he said, because business is going to recover. And I need to make sure that I'm doing everything. So he comes in and, it's not long. It's 20 minutes, 15 minutes where he comes on, says hi, talks about stuff. But on the one that they allowed me to join, he said, learn new skills. Learn new skills now. We're going to open up our learning management system. If you believe you don't have the skills to be an engineer, amazing. Learn how to do Zoom, learn how to do Teams, learn how to do Slack. We have, hundreds of thousands of people that are now remote who can't work out how to connect their audio to Zoom. They need someone to phone. You can learn something. And so he opened up LinkedIn Learning. And at the end of the call, you kind of felt the energy that everyone who had just been made unemployed was almost cheering for trust. I think it goes back to your statement, trust. Like, it's really awful, but we trust this guy. He's not going to do wrong by us. And he said, look, you'll be first in line. If you learn these skills and we need them, come back, earn more money. So what we're starting to see is these leaders rise up that, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm like, oh my God, that's the leader that I've wanted all my life. And you know them when you see it. And I'm not talking about the motivational leaders you see on a TEDx or a meme on LinkedIn. I'm talking about someone who just fundamentally gets you and understands and is there. And, I think your word trust is 100% correct, because for all of these companies, that's the one thing in common for our customers, is wanting to maintain a level of trust, transparency with their former employees, and including one of our customers, people who left kind of not so voluntary. There was a conversation around a path to redemption. So, okay, you left 10 years ago because you were a bit of an idiot, because you weren't quite ready, because you had a bad manager, because you were in the wrong role, because you were young, because of a million reasons. It doesn't mean that the tick box, ineligible to rehire, should be a permanent stain on your life. And I think that's hopefully the only silver lining of 2020, is how human people have become, because they haven't had a choice. Become human or die. Go, period. Accept that that's the new reality. Apologies for my soapbox speech.
Yeah, I was just, I had this thought, you and I are old enough that when we were in high school, we didn't have cell phones with cameras and videos on it and so forth. And, you probably have seen the Facebook memes about, thank God, right? That we didn't have that, because, if all of that was like recorded, which it is now. So, just thank God that we aren't held accountable and judged by the actions that we were young. I'll
Right.
just, so, but now we've got that actually occurring where, where young people do have that situation. Like you said, they were an idiot. They did something stupid, and, and it's like, what do? You can't remove that memory of that. But that's where the judgment, and, when we have this tendency to judge people for their actions, and, make it permanent and so forth, which when you're talking about trust and you're talking about empathy, you mentioned the word empathy earlier, it's a whole different way of looking at things. Mentorship, empathy, trust. I remember a story, and then we'll wrap up. But I remember this story where there was, and I forget what book it came from, that this guy made this like huge blunder, cost the company $2 million. So he goes into the office, meets with the exec, and says, "I know you're going to fire me," right? He was in sales or whatever. So he's like, "I know you're going to fire me. So I get it." And, and the guy said, "Fire you? Why would I fire you? You just cost us $2 million.
Yeah.
Hopefully you learn something out of that, that you're going to use and apply. Right. And not only are you going to make back the 2 million, you're going to make a whole lot more money from that." So the worst thing that we could do would be to fire you. And what a different way to look at it. But for that to work, there has to be trust. There has to be learning, mentorship. Okay, so what are you going to do with that? And so how can you ensure that you don't do it again? And so that's culture. So I love this conversation. We could talk for hours.
For hours.
Yeah.
and I so agree. And I love it. And I love that point you make, because I think a lot of leaders, individuals, they look at this kind of, that old term, how do you eat an elephant? It's so overwhelming. It's so impossible. Let's not touch culture because it's too big. And the answer is, well, you eat it one bite at a time. And I think when we talk about whether it's us for maintaining action with your former employees, whether it's something else you're doing internally, one step at a time. And that's okay. Test, try, play. That there is a wealth of forgiveness in the market now, where because of everything that's happened, you actually can say, we're going to try something. And your employees are not going to be like, I can't believe they haven't vetted. No, same with your customers. I always think about like the Mandarin Oriental, the Ritz-Carlton 2 years ago, if they'd sent you an email, "Hey, we're trying this new beta thing," you'd be like, "Really? At $2,000 a night, you're trying a beta thing?" Now, if they sent it, we'd be like, "That's so cool. I can't wait to be a part of it." So if there was ever a time to change or to, do a 180 or whatever, or a 90 or whatever it is, to take that step, that's what I think part of our overall mission that we're trying to achieve around alumni engagement is just, if you can't recognize that being good to people is good for business, you're going to have bigger problems.
Yeah. It's going to be a short stint.
Yes,
so,
sure.
it's funny because my cat, right, comes through in my podcast, and you think about even little things like that. A year ago, that would be not cool. 2 years ago, people would be like, "Oh, what's that about?" Nowadays, we are becoming so much more empathetic, when those things happen, or the phone rings during a podcast, or, your daughter walks in, or whatever the case is. These things happen. And the more human we are, and the more empathy we have, the more space that we create for others, but also for ourselves in that process. So we all win in that process. So
true. I think about that of like, a year ago, how embarrassed I would have been if my wife had walked behind me, like I would have just been mortified. And you're right. Why?
And on cue.
Yeah, and I was about to say, and on cue, welcome my wife. But I think the other side of that, though, is what that has meant is that the relationships vendors have with customers, people have with each other, is more human. And because it's more human, it forces more honesty, more trust, more empathy, more transparency. So again, there is no silver lining to 2020, but do I think there are some net positive outputs that we're going to see out of it? Yes. And I think one of them is I love seeing your cat. I love seeing my customers' kids. And just because they work at, a Fortune 5 company, they have kids too. You know, they have drama as well. They have phones that go off, and I think it kind of normalized everything. I don't have to put on a show to you. I am who I am, and I'm proud of that. And my results are in my results, not in whether my dog walks by.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's so good, James. Thank you so much for being here, hanging out with us, and really getting to the heart of why you do what you do, how you do it. And it is truly transformative. You are a leader of transformation, whether you call yourself that or not. You know what's funny is a lot of the leaders of transformation that I interview, like thought leaders, they don't set out and say, I'm going to be a thought leader. No, they don't do that. They just see something differently. They get curious and they explore something, and then they take action on it, of course, and then they have success with it, and people go, hey, how'd you do that, and why is that? So I see that in you, is that you just took action on something. You said, why is it like that? Going back to that conference
Right.
that you were at and saying, what are we having this conversation about? A bot, yay, or is that something to be excited about? And so coming all the way to where you are now, transforming companies and literally transforming lives. So I want to acknowledge you for that. And yeah, I also want to give our listeners a way to connect with you. Of course, it's going to be on our website, leadersoftransformation.com. It'll be in the show notes. But for those of you that are listening who are like, what's the link? I just want to go directly to it. EnterpriseAlumni.com is the link where you can learn more about it. That's actually their platform where you can, if it's for your company, or maybe you learn about a company that you work for, this might be a suggestion, and saying, hey, have you guys thought of this? Do you know about this? Because this is still a fairly new concept. And so, get the word out. And so that's why we have James here, is to share, and also to get the word out about what he's doing. So we encourage you that. Again, James, thank you for being here today, and we appreciate you. And we look forward to seeing you all in the next episode of Leaders Transformation real soon.